How do we solve crime? That's a very difficult question. Very regularly, I am kind of skeptical about many academics, which could seem strange because I do enjoy knowledge. I like learning. I like studying things. I like researching things, diving into information, trying to dig a little deeper and learn a little more. But oftentimes I find academics sometimes, and especially in these more modern times, many academics kind of seem like they lean away from knowledge and more to accreditation. And very often you tend to see that an academic tends to push things in a direction where they get employment. Not that they're trying to solve an issue, but they're trying to make sure they're employed. That's the feeling I get sometimes. So if you have an academic plumber, all the solutions that that academic plumber is going to bring up would be solutions that involve pipes and running water pipes and joining PVC pipes or maybe even metal pipes if they're that kind of plumber. And it just gets that tendency to me. And many of the areas of study in universities and schools that aren't hard sciences, that don't necessarily use firm scientific criteria, it could be a bit more difficult to judge their effectiveness and judge how truthful they are. And one of those areas that could sometimes seem like that could be criminology, the study of crime. Sometimes when you see certain suggestions about from criminologists and you see the direction they head in, you could wonder all of the if all of the theories are in line with reality. That's something I wonder, at least reading some amount of criminology. But on the other hand, you cannot deny all of it, that there is something scientific to understanding ways how people do things, ways how people may attempt to get around the laws, trends that criminals may have, trends that may be changing among criminals. And that is something that criminologists would, of course, be better at. And there's a Guardian article here that quotes some criminologists and their views on where they see crime and criminality in Trinidad moving forward. There are two criminologists. I read the entire article and it was an interesting read to me. So I think it may be an interesting read for all of us and an interesting discussion. There were two criminologists, and at the very end of it, there was a social activist. So someone who is more on the ground and at the ground level. So we're going to go through the three different suggestions and the three different views and see which one to you sounds a bit more grounded. So the Guardian article reads, July 1990 won't happen again, but experts warn TNT facing different terror threat, deepening social and economic problems. Times have changed since the attempted coup of July 1990. Those who wish to destabilize society and carry out illegal acts have developed new ways of doing it, and so law enforcement authorities must be prepared for the new world of terrorism and criminal activities. This was the view of several experts who commented on increasing criminal activity across the country. The bloody rampage in TNT continues as 2021 winds down. According to statistics from TNT Police Service, between January and September, there were 287 murders. The reported murder toll of 2020 was 393. That's a lot of people. And to consider that the vast majority of those are young men under 30. What does that do to our society? I mean, our country isn't that large. That's a number of young men that statistically, after a while, you would be able to measure that. That's a considerable amount. Can we afford to be losing, going up the road to 400 and in some years going up the road to 500 and more young men every year? That's kind of insane. Given the economic and social problems in this country, is the country at risk of another 1990? According to criminologist Renee Cummings, TNT should be prepared for any situation and can't afford to be caught off guard. A graduate of John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York, Cummings is a criminal psychologist who specializes in terrorism studies and the psychodynamics of terrorism. Wow. Okay, the psychodynamics of terrorism. She is also an artificial intelligence strategist, ethicist, and data activist. Very accomplished individual. If you are looking for the same repertoire, then you are looking for trouble, she warned. Chances are it won't look like 1990 again. So if you are looking for that methodology, you might get another surprise. Internationally, terrorism is not a stagnant threat. Given the access to technology, the internet, social media, new and emerging technologies such as AI, be prepared for and to defend against multiple threats or attacks at one time. And this is very well what I was speaking about at the very beginning. Not that I disagree that some terrorists may very well be using artificial intelligence to attempt to do whatever nefarious activities they may want to do, but someone who is an AI strategist just so happens to say that we need some more AI strategy in managing terrorism in our country. And not that I doubt there may be terrorists lurking somewhere around Trinidad. I'm just unsure of the number and seriousness of them. Noting that criminals have changed the way they carry out their nefarious activities, Cummings advised AI can be used to enhance the intensity of a terrorist attack or to amplify the potential of groups with grievances. What exactly is that? Drop that in the comments. Don't forget to click that like button, tap that like button. If you haven't done that yet, make sure it's selected. Do subscribe if you are not yet subscribed, and drop a comment. Tell me what you think. First off, what do you think psychodynamics of terrorism refers to? That's the first part. And how exactly do you think terrorists would use artificial intelligence to enhance the intensity of their attacks? Now, again, I do not doubt that it is possible. Artificial intelligence, meaning, generally speaking, algorithmic learning or algorithmic processing that could function in such a way that it could seem intelligent. It could make some decisions. Sometimes rudimentary decisions, sometimes more advanced decisions, according to how advanced the artificial intelligence is. And I am not sure in Trinidad and Tobago we are at the stage where we have terrorists implementing artificial intelligence in their plans. I just don't see it yet. And it can be used, according to the criminologists, it can be used to amplify the potential of groups with grievances, legitimate or perceived grievances, or disrupt elements to disseminate extremist propaganda and spread disinformation campaigns across social media. Now, that one I can understand. That could incite violence in the streets. 31 years ago was a very long time. The world is not the same. That one I could understand. That the use of social media now is a very powerful tool. And all the uses are not always geared towards positive uses. So sometimes you have the spreading of disinformation. And it's it's interesting that she said disinformation, because disinformation and misinformation aren't exactly the same. From my understanding of what they mean is misinformation generally means incorrect information. Someone is spreading fake news, as we would call it. While disinformation could very well be correct news, but the narrative it is told in or the angle it is told with could lean in a certain direction. And I think correctly that disinformation is much more dangerous in modern times than misinformation. If you look especially over in the US and how their news networks are so politicized, the exact precise same story and the same facts, and read how the narratives are constructed around those facts. And some of it may very well be able to be classified as disinformation. On the issue of whether TNT's institutions have done enough to prepare for a potential terrorist attack or other unforeseen circumstances, Cummings asked, can our security agencies invoke a collective defense in real time? What criminological models have they been using to design a response? How have they been gathering data? What are analysts looking for? And it seems here like she's trying to ascertain what proper practices the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service use in how they tackle crime. And I know at the beginning I insinuated or basically said that many times academics seem like they're trying to line up themselves for a job, and this could seem like that, but I also agree that it is a pertinent question. Does our police service use actual methodology when trying to do things to lower crime? How exactly do they go about it? Is it a standardized procedure, or is it kind of just vai? I could understand the question because sometimes from an onlooker you could wonder. Now, I'm pretty sure the TTPS would say that they do have their methodologies and they do have their analysts. It's just sometimes looking on from the outside, one can wonder. As inconvenient as it might be, a roadblock is rather a low level when compared to radical elements going dark and deep inside the dark web, where they can communicate more quickly, covering expanding distances and conspire through encrypted applications, avoiding detection as they radicalize, recruit, raise funds, make tutorials, etc., etc., etc. And I agree. Sometimes she's saying kind of what I'm saying there. Sometimes from the outside looking in, it seems like roadblocks and emergency searches could be the extent of some of these strategies. And in a new modern world, we would be hoping to see something a little further than that. Now, on to the next criminologist. New technology, new threats. Professor Ramesh Diosaran, who wrote a book on the 1990 Muslimin insurrection, A Society Under Siege, said a 1990 scenario with masked gun-toting militants storming the parliament would be unlikely today. However, there are dangers the nation should be prepared for. The increased number of police guards and security now present around will be better alerted than they were in 1990. Given the technology and remote systems available, there is, however, a different sinister danger against which the authorities should be alert. That is the possible clandestine planting of lethal bombs. Yes, bombs within the premises of Parliament or around government buildings. This calls for sophisticated security and vigilance for prevention, surveillance, and tactical restraint. Now, that isn't too preposterous of a suggestion, seeing that there have been some explosives in and around our capital before, but a lot of them seemed less professional. And not to be naive, it may be some people practicing and getting better at it, but I am unsure how motivated many of the malcontents in our society are to bomb the parliament. That seems pretty far in on the deep side. Deusaran said the authorities must come up with ways to stem the inflow of guns and drugs across TNT's borders if they want to see a reduction in crime. He also warned that the political establishment must solve the country's deepening social and economic problems. Now, that I agree with totally. I think when I look at our crime situation in our country, the vast majority of crimes seem to be linked to the illegal gun and drug trade. Well, the vast majority of our violent crime. You look around and you're seeing these are gang members killing each other. And these gang members aren't killing each other over some political ideology. They aren't doing this to meet some political need. They aren't aiming at some terrorist political goal. No, this is about money. This is about the hustle. And to be fair, the way I see Trinidad possibly reaching to the kind of extremes where you're planting stuff outside the parliament might be if you do just what he said there, if you actually tackle the base and stem cause of a lot of the crime, our drug trade. And I think possibly if you start hitting these gangs where their money comes from, then we may see the kind of mayhem that Professor Deusaran is talking about. At least that's the way I see it. The need for early and effective management of popular disenchantment, such as road breakdowns, unbearable water shortages, political victimization, runaway cost of living prices, non-responsiveness from government agencies, etc. The authorities should be alerted that as such popular disenchantment grows, it can be captured and exploited by charismatic leadership and turned into a national security threat. There were no social media in 1990, but there is today, which makes the planning and clandestine execution of threats and bombs easier and more pervasive, the Usaran said. I do not doubt that there are malcontents in the society, people who are not pleased with how things are going. But generally speaking, if we could aim and identify several of those people who stir up some of the most friction in the society, I don't think they're aiming at the level of chaos that would be caused by an explosive attack in our capital. Look around. There have been numerous people calling for protests day in, day out. How many protests do you actually see on the streets? One of the things is Trinidad is a pretty comfortable country, and I said this before. Once people are comfortable, they don't generally do this whole civil disobedience thing very much. And civil disobedience is still a step much shorter than terrorism. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I am not a criminologist, and these are the criminologists. But I somehow don't see it happening like that. However, in a different angle to the previous criminologist, Professor Deusaran has a more hopeful view of the TTPS. As a paramilitary structured organization, the police service, even without a substantive commissioner, is still capable of dealing with crime. There are several ranks with specific duties, responsibilities, and accountability, and these officers under senior supervision must be able to rise to the occasion. Now, this last piece comes from a social activist, and tell me what you think. No revolution on the horizon. Social activist Martin Alexander does not believe TNT will see another revolution or coup anytime soon. Alexander, who was involved in student protests during the 1970 Black Power Revolution, said, in 1970, there was massive participation of persons in the dissatisfaction of the state of development of the country as a newly independent nation. In 1990, there were a series of incidents between the Jamaat al-Muslimin and the state over this parcel of land, which ended up in the 1990 incident. However, you don't have any such situations obtaining right now. There's no one particular group basically at each other's throat. He said the social unrest in Port of Spain last year was small compared to previous incidents. To me, this sounds a lot more on point. The social climate, although some members, especially of the opposition, would like to make it seem like the political and social climate is one as boisterous as, say, 1990 or the 1970s. I think that is far from the truth, and the difficulty they're having in even stirring up their own supporters to get along, for example, with the October Revolution, etc., etc., you could see it really doesn't have that level of discontent in the society. There are people angry. I would not doubt that. And I'm not pleased with many things. But the nature of how Trinidad is set up, the nature of how our culture is, I think what you'd find much more of is people would speak out more. You would see more politics happening. You'd see more movement in the political arena. But I highly doubt you'd really see people looking to risk their lives and freedom for that. And the main oppositions, the main drivers of the stirring of strife, it could seem, in our country are the two main political parties. And neither of those two parties want Parliament destroyed. Both of those two parties are basically as establishment comes. They don't want the establishment crumbling. They just want to rule the establishment. So I could agree with him on that. Criminal activities would be determined by things that are happening within their area, depending on if there's a void and another group is weaker and they can move against that group. That sounds like regular gang warfare and what seems to be going on a lot in Trinidad too. Also, it's also about the availability of drugs. Remember, the weed that used to come from St. Vincent is no longer there. All the weed burned down with soufre. Where they used to plant the weed, Alexander said. Now listen, that is Mr. Martin Alexander. I don't live in St. Vincent. If perchance a St. Vincentian who is a viewer of this channel is looking on, you could comment and tell me if that is true, if the Caribbean is currently seeing a shortage of the herb because of the activities of Mount Soufre. That's according to him. And that could actually make some sense. If there is a shortage of the supply, then and the demand remains the same, you could have some price increases and you could have some more friction going on for territory and turf. That makes sense. He warned that social conditions in the country are deteriorating and called on the political and economic establishments to look out for TNT's best interest. This is not just about COVID. These are problems that we have had since independence. Nothing changed since colonialism. We have had governments with no vision, he said. I could understand that sentiment, that it could seem that the vision, I wouldn't say no vision because I think that is incorrect. I think every government has some kind of vision, but a lot of the visions, I don't think they attempt to use that position and that vision to lead the country consciously from being aware of the current position it is in. So we evaluate where we are currently and envisioning a realistic point to carry this current country to in a stipulated level of time. I just don't think, it just doesn't seem like that is how carefully some of these visions that many of the governments that have come and gone have had. And also I could understand on his side seeing that it seems a lot very similar to colonialism, because a lot of the things in the country, a lot of the larger businesses, although some of them have been taken over by the state, they still aren't really under the control of the regular citizen. The regular citizen is still outside of the loop of a lot of the economic and political activity. That just seems to be the truth. What do you think? Tell me. That's all I have for now. I hope you are educated, informed, or entertained. And do stay tuned. I'll see you in the next video. And you feel the music, rising with the time.